Hey guys, Lonewolf here. So this video was going to be a more specific look at a particular aspect of Battlefield Hardline, but then I realized that having just completed the beta, there's a good chance the Visceral are going to change and rebalance things before general release. And so if I went into detail about a weapon, for example, there's a good chance much of that information is going to change and therefore not be very useful to anyone. So what I decided to do instead is give my list of the top 10 things I've liked and disliked about the Hardline beta, the things I'd like to see change the most and the things I've really enjoyed the most. So in no particular order, starting off with the good things, the objective score reward. This is a really big thing for me. In Battlefield 4, it just felt like oftentimes my team really couldn't care less about the objectives and it was just me and perhaps a friend chasing around after all the flags, and we were just never going to win if the enemy team knew what they were doing. So I think it's a great thing that they've added more score for capturing objectives, for doing objective things in general, and only time will tell whether this actually makes people play the objective, but I'm pretty optimistic about this change. Now for the most part in Battlefield 4, I only really played on 64-man conquest servers unless I was playing in a more private environment. Now in this game I've really enjoyed Heist, at least on Bank Job. I really like the pacing on 32-man servers, and it allows for a different style of gameplay that I've been really enjoying. So I'll have to wait and see what the other maps are like for Heist, but at least on this one I've been really enjoying it. The higher damage. Now, this is something that not everyone seems to be getting along with, but for me personally, I've really enjoyed the faster time to kill. It allows me to conduct a flank and then kill pretty much everyone I come across because I've got that much damage at my disposal. I can kill people very quickly, and I don't probably need to reload in between killing a group of enemies, whereas in Battlefield 4, it really felt like oftentimes I'd get 2, 3 people, or maybe 4 if I was really close to them, but then I'd need to reload and there was a good chance I was going to get killed. So I've been enjoying this reward for flanking, and I do think it's a positive change, but like I said, some people aren't getting along with this, and we'll just have to wait and see whether Visceral decides to change it as a result. Something else I think a lot of people haven't taken into account about this faster time to kill is that it's sort of an indirect nerf to the operator class, the medbag, because if you can kill people much faster, then there's a much greater chance that your health status going into an engagement has less of an impact than it did if you were able to react and put a couple of shots into somebody. It means that if you have 12 health and you're going against somebody who has 100 health, if you shoot first and you're accurate, you can probably kill that person, whereas in Battlefield 4, if you shot at them and they have much more health than you, there's a good chance they turn around and put just one bullet into you and they win that engagement based upon the fact that they had a med bag and they could heal prior to the engagement. Now this is one I'm kind of torn about, and I suspect it's going to be fairly contentious within the community as a whole, but the absence of vehicles is something I have rather enjoyed, I think for no other reason than it's just a big change from Battlefield 4. As much as I did enjoy flying around in jets or helicopters or driving tanks and LAVs, if you came across an enemy team with a few good pilots or a few good drivers here and there, it just felt almost impossible to counter unless your team was really committed to dealing with them. They could rack up huge kill streaks almost unimpeded, and it just felt a little bit broken from time to time, and I was a bit sick of just being killed by threats I absolutely couldn't counter, that I just couldn't deal with. So in this game, with almost everyone playing as infantry, and if they are in a vehicle, then I can generally shoot them out of it, I don't feel so powerless against the vehicle threats. Now the weapon variety is another thing that I think is absolutely great. I've talked about this before, that in Battlefield 4, as much as weapons were cosmetically different from one another, they did seem to perform very similarly a lot of the time, and it just made everything feel fairly homogeneous, whereas in this game the weapon variety is fairly extreme. A lot of weapons are very different from one another. Some things are kind of similar, but for the most part, weapons have a uniqueness about them, and I think this is great. Now from what I've seen so far, the map design in this game does seem to be pretty good. It's not too clustery, it's not too open. I obviously can't comment on the whole game because I haven't played most of the maps, but from what I've seen so far it's pretty good. I can't quite put my finger on exactly what it is, but for whatever reason I just have been enjoying the maps so far. Hit registration. Now I've mentioned this before, but the hit registration in this game just feels so much more on point than Battlefield 4's. I feel like I'm aware of exactly when I strike a target, I feel like I'm aware of exactly how many times I've hit a target, whereas in Battlefield 4 I shoot at someone and I just seem to get one sort of solid soft hit marker that continues for however long I'm shooting at them. And in this game it just feels much more punchy, it feels much more responsive, and I really like this particular aspect of the netcode or HUD. I never thought I'd be able to say this, but the Enforcer class just feels absolutely great to me. I really didn't enjoy the LMGs for the support class in Battlefield 4, and I just felt they were too sluggish, the handling was slow, they reloaded really slowly, it just didn't suit my playstyle at all, whereas the battle rifles for the Enforcer class absolutely do. I really enjoy them. I love the fact that now I can play that role, I can hand out ammo, without feeling like I'm handicapping myself in the process. This is a bit of a small one, but it's significant in its own way. The capture zone indicator, I really can't believe this wasn't in previous games. It's a minor thing, but that indication line that shows you exactly where you need to stand to capture an objective, I just think this is useful. It's kind of UI improvement I really appreciate, and again, I can't believe it wasn't in previous games, and I'm glad it's in this one. And lastly, this still feels like a Battlefield game to me. I was kind of worried that without so many vehicles and with probably smaller maps, that this game wasn't going to have the kind of scope that I'm used to from a Battlefield game, and it does, at least in my opinion. I know this is subjective, and if you disagree with me, do leave your thoughts in the comments below, but I feel like this game still has that large-scale Battlefield combat that I really love, and I'm very pleased that Visceral have managed to pull this off. So with all those good things out of the way, and overall I do think this is a good game, let's move on to the bad things, the things that range from just frustrating to downright broken. So again, in no particular order, starting off, as much as I wish I wasn't one of these people, I do care how a game looks. I think a lot of PC gamers feel the same, and presumably a lot of the people who moved on to next-gen consoles when they were first released, I care that the game looks good, and this one doesn't look as good as Battlefield 4, at least in my opinion, and I think it's an opinion shared by a lot of people. I would expect that if the graphics don't improve with the general release of this game, it's going to be a criticism leveled against it by a lot of reviewers, and if it isn't, I'll be kind of surprised. But again, it's not a huge deal for me. The graphics are still good, they're just not as good as Battlefield 4. So I kind of hope this improves, but I'm not too optimistic about this one. Now, another one I am more optimistic about, but is likewise a bigger problem, is the performance in the beta. On PC, I got a pretty good frame rate, somewhere between about 90 and 150 frames per second, depending on where I was, but the micro stutter is just unbearable. I went back and played Battlefield 4 yesterday, and the first thing I noticed is that that game is so much smoother. The micro stutter in the Hardline Beta may well be able to be corrected by a driver update, and I really hope it is, because this is a serious issue for me, and whilst it probably wouldn't stop me playing the game, I'll be really disappointed if this isn't fixed. Now, moving on to actual features of the game, the laser trip mine, I have no idea why they brought this kind of thing back. I just don't get it. I really will never understand this. The Claymore was annoying enough. The laser trip mine is even more difficult to see, and it just doesn't make sense to me that they put it in the game. This seems to serve only one purpose, which is just to piss people off. I really have no idea why it's there. The argument that you can get very good at placing these things in the right spots, that's nonsense from my perspective. It's so easy to put these things in a place where nobody's going to see them, just run into them. It's the kind of random crap that you're going to get killed with all the time, and it's really frustrating and really detracts from gameplay. Another thing that may detract from gameplay if it isn't fixed is the poor weapon balance. As much as I've enjoyed the uniqueness of weapons in this game, and I do think that's a great thing, the balance itself is not good. There are some weapons in classes that just feel distinctly underpowered, and others which are clearly better than every other weapon. I don't think this was intentional, but it certainly feels like it might be, because they are so clearly better statistically. On paper you can see that these weapons will perform better, and in practice they do, so I don't know how this was overlooked. Another recurring issue from Battlefield 4 is poor indication that you're taking damage. Some of the time this feels really good, and I feel like I'm clearly notified that I've taken a bullet, and then other times I can take 3 bullets and drop down to 30 health, and I'm barely even aware that I was hit more than once. So I just feel like this needs to be improved, and the directional indication needs to be improved a bit, and also the health meter has been made really small down in the bottom right. I feel like this needs to be given a more prominent place on screen, and I'd really like if they change this before general release. Visual recoil. I don't understand why they won't learn from their mistake. Visual recoil is not realistic, and it does not add anything to the game. It does not make it more skill dependent at all, because you cannot actually see where your gun is bouncing, you just have to guess. This bit makes the game arbitrarily more difficult, and I really don't think it should have been added back in. This is incredibly frustrating, and I just don't understand why it's there. On a much more minor note, I've been lamenting the loss of the battle screen. I'm not sure whether this is just because I've overlooked the feature being hidden somewhere else, but I can't seem to find it, and I really wish they'd bring this back, because it just gives you a much greater overview of the battlefield, and it's something I'm really missing. Now, another minor gripe of mine, and I say minor because it doesn't really impact gameplay, is that this game had a real opportunity to do cops and robbers in a very gritty, realistic, and down-to-earth kind of way, and what it's actually ended up doing is doing it in more of a ridiculous and silly way. Between some of the stupid customization options that you get, including a giant yellow triangle for a reticle, and the absurd callouts you get in-game, which by the way happen way too often, this game just feels kind of a joke in some ways. It's quite well executed in terms of gameplay and mechanics, but in terms of its theme, it just feels silly. Moving on to my last 2 points, these are what I would consider to be much more serious, and the first of the two is going to seem very specific and potentially a little bit petty depending on how many times this has happened to you, which is that I feel like when you vault over objects, it's just very inconsistent. Sometimes I jump over and it's fine. Other times I try to vault an object, like through a window, and I just end up jumping on the spot. This is really aggravating. The same thing happened in Battlefield 4, I guess just because the objects on the map, they all have to be plotted out and perhaps they aren't perfect, but the number of times I've tried to jump through windows on Dust Bowl only to find that I jump on the spot and as a result somebody's able to kill me because I'm stuck there, it just really winds me up, and I do think they need to put some effort into fixing this, because if you actually watch back your footage, you'll realize just how often you vault over objects and just how often it doesn't work. And lastly, I think a lot of people are going to agree with me on this, but the lack of destruction is really disappointing. Having come from Call of Duty a couple of years ago, I didn't think that the transition back to static maps was going to bother me all that much. But actually, having played the beta more and more, I've come to realize that I took the level of destruction available in Battlefield 4 rather for granted. So I'm really hoping that in the other maps there is going to be some more destruction available, but I'm not overly optimistic. And so at this stage, I think I'm just going to have to settle for the fact that in Battlefield Hardline, the only destruction is fairly scripted. I'm just a bit disappointed that they've decided to more or less remove this aspect which feels quite so quintessential to the Battlefield series. So let me know what you thought of my list down in the comments below. Give me your opinions, what you've liked, what you haven't liked. I think this game has some real potential. I'll be very interested to see what Visceral changes before release. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.